So the way this will work, just really quickly, is that I'm going to give examples of what I do, how I do, and specific examples. We're going to give Zoom examples, a couple of case studies, and so you get to see a complete picture of how I process things, where that process comes from, and how I'm able to meet any pitcher at any point of the process that they're in, how I am able to get pitchers from other pitching coaches and collaborate in those ways in terms of that development piece. And then at the same time, how I'm able to also do my college consulting and be able to be of value there and in that sense. So once I'm done with that, we'll have plenty of time for questions afterward. If you've got to leave during that moment, type your questions into the box here. There's the AI companion that's on that you can use to get you up to date, or just so it timestamps, because I'm going to talk about a lot in the beginning, and then that way it timestamps. Hey, as soon as you have that question, even though I don't answer it, then just type it out so that I know where it was in the flow of things. So go ahead. Adding one person. They're joining. First thing I'm going to do is share my desktop. All right. So the first thing you're going to see here is everything that I do is about creating an ecosystem for performance for all of our pitchers. So you're going to see like a couple of images here. Here, what that is that is an energy flow model. So the way that works in terms of those numbers is all pitchers, no matter how they pitch, whatever style you think they pitch with, they all have these 5 things that happen during their pitching motion. And so the way we want to understand these 5 pieces is that there's a drop. Number 2 is the shift. Number 3 is the drive. 4 is the landing. 5 is a delivery. So to give you a general sense of how we view that in a pitching motion is force plates are essentially just things that are underneath an athlete when they're moving. So the force plates give you spikes in readings of when an athlete does certain things. So I'm going to minimize this so we can see both at the same time. Move this over to the side. So if we're looking at a classical motion at all, like it doesn't matter any type of motion, there is going to be a moment where an athlete drops pressure, so they accelerate into the ground. Newton's laws are very important to me in pitching. Second law is force equals mass times acceleration. What these plates do is they read force. So when the mass of the object, of the subject, the pitcher, accelerates into a certain area, there is a spike in that overall space here. So we see that there's left and right foot, and there's the red is the combination of the two. That's how those two things work out there. So when an athlete, whatever they're making a decision, you can see she's calm and relaxed, goes through her little pre-motion. When we accelerate down into our pitch, that acceleration of the upper body is going to cause a spike of energy. We call that our drop, okay? When we have that biggest spike, all I'm looking at when I'm getting an assessment of an athlete is where those spikes occur. So for her, generally, you can see that she's got a flat foot on both feet. So that generally, even though that spike is going to be high here, that's typically, you're going to see the back foot and the front foot pretty close to each other in terms of they're both giving off excess body weight. So weight higher than she has. Some kids have all their weight on the back foot when the drop is the highest. Some kids have middle. Some kids have more of it already moving forward at that same time. Doesn't matter. It's information that we want to understand and discern to find out what's appropriate or what are the next steps for that athlete. After an athlete does that, number two is going to be a shift. So that shift in particular is very literal. It is a shift of weight into our front foot. And that's why this blue line, the back leg, drops to 0. To be clear, this is not Cambry's official force signature. This was just the example from the presentation. So when we see this happen, when that back foot completely comes off or has no pressure in it, it can be about right there. It can be when it's completely off. So when that back foot goes to zero, weight is moving onto that front foot. That piece is important, and it's probably 90% of what you'll see on social media of people talking about trying to drive, get your knee over your toe, whatever phrase they want to use. Like, I don't really care what people are saying. I care about what my kids are actually doing. And this instrument in particular, outside of video, gives us a validation of what we're actually doing. So in that shift portion, all that is something we want to look at. Generally, if we see a shift here, there should be an additional pulse of load if weight gets loaded in there. So we'll give an example of that here in a second. So after that, obviously, when we push our hardest, there is 3, our official, I just call it our drive. I know a lot of people will call all of it, the whole thing, a drive. I want to be as literal as possible all the time with my kids. I want to be as relatable as possible. When you think about drop, I'm very specific that you're not dropping your body. That's not what it means. We're just dropping weight into the ground, whether it goes into the back foot, the front foot, whether your knees bend, whether they stiffen, whether your upper body does it. I don't really care. I'm going to discover those things and we're going to work them out together. I just want to see when and how it occurs and see if you're aware of it. That's where the questions come in. So generally, those 3 things are always going to happen. Not generally, 100% of the time, those things are going to happen. You're going to see these 2 other spikes, which super simple, landing and delivery. The biggest thing you want to just see here is that landing is always going to be the biggest spike. And you can read any piece of research. All these kids are going to land with 2 to 4 times their body weight when they hit the ground. Gives you an opportunity to understand that's relevant for 2 reasons. 1, we got to know it. 2, what are you doing in your training? What is your athlete doing outside of lifting weights? You can't just lift to build 2 to 4 times body weight on a single leg. There has to be plyometrics. There has to be jumps, landings, all these other variations, especially if your athlete is, say, you're trying the leaping phase. All that's going to do is make that number higher. So I don't care if you leap, but do you do the appropriate training outside of that space so that you can do it a whole season? Because it's a different set of loads that's required for your body. We just call it landing. Who cares? And then 5, you're going to see an additional spike. That is when we reaccelerate, when the body comes crashing through from our drive into this foot again. That's why we get into the spike. And if you'll notice, now that we've gone through those, if you notice, like, there's the timestamps at the bottom. Okay. Time landing, 6.7. And that initial spike is like 6.825. So it's very quickly. Yes, I've zoomed in here, so it's a snapshot, but these are tenths of a second, hundredths of a second that these moments are taking place. So just understand that space for it. So for me, that's one of the first things that I'll look at for athletes. And from there, what we're going to look at is archetypes. So for me, I've created these archetypes so that we understand when the drop happens, what does the back leg look like? We just saw this young lady here. We see the heel is flat and the leg is relatively straight. All that does is kind of inform me about which muscle groups are going to be the most active. And that's why you see some dark red and some light red. All muscles are going to be active at the same time. They're both synergistic and antagonistic, and they're the prime movers. So you have these 3 groups. Your body's acting. Like, I don't ever like hearing, I need to use my legs. You're always using your legs, otherwise you couldn't stand. What muscles you use are dictated by what position your bones and skeletons are in. And I'll cover that here in a second. But there's 3 main hip archetypes. When I load, foot goes into the back leg, the knee is straight, the heel is down. Very similar fashion is hip archetype 2. The heel is elevated. Different set of muscles are likely working. And then number three, which you'll see on social media, or you've probably had someone tell you that they hate the way my kids stand or this and that. They don't know why we stand in certain ways. I'll explain all of that. But then there's hip archetype 3, and that's the knee bent and the heel up at the same time. So again, we're just giving them categories so that I start to understand, okay, why maybe or maybe not be seeing the certain signature that we saw in the force plates, what muscle groups are generally going to be in a position to work, because that's going to dictate everything about what's important about Newton's laws and pitching. So a lot of wording there. You don't have to read it in particular, but the concept is just very simple. Newton's first law, an object in motion stays in motion, is unless acted upon by an external force. The biggest takeaway there that I tell my athletes, and the reason generally if I have a lesson, it's the first time where we're doing an evaluation, I literally just ask the kid to show me what they do and I'll ask them questions during their warm up why those things are important to them, just to observe and ask. Because the biggest thing we miss when it comes to physics and pitching is that our thoughts are very powerful and they're very important. If an athlete hears you say something and they prioritize only a piece of it, that's the piece that's going to come out in their pitching. I want to know that about your kid. I want to understand that about that space. I also, and it's also the reason, excuse me, why I watch or learn the language that other pitching coaches use, regardless if I think it's valuable or not. It's important to the kid, especially if I'm getting them from multiple places and they've gone through multiple online groups, this and that. Most of the language that becomes separate, I'm 100% going to say that it's for sales. It is. We try to come up with words all the time. I'm trying to be as literal as possible intentionally, because when you Google something, I want the definition to say 10,000 hits and it's all the same. That's my goal all the time when we're talking about things. That's why the force model is very literal. Drop, shift, landing, deliver the ball. Boom. You're going to do those 5 things. How you do them, when they do them, are you aware of them? That's where Newton's first law comes into play so much. Because if a kid tells me, oh, well, I'm really focused on, getting into my front leg, getting my knee over my toe, blah, blah, blah. That's going to be important. And I'm likely going to see them compensate in certain ways to match that idea. You could have the kid using the same style, the same windup, but if you ask them that question, they may say, well, I'm really trying to be sure, like, know where my landing is, really be firm on my front side. Okay, so that tells me that likely they're not going to really pay attention to if they shift their weight well or if they drive it well, or they're just going to look like a pretty picture during the drive and they're going to reach more. They're going to overstrike because it's important to them. And I want to know what's important to them because it's going to help us understand that order. If you notice, there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Why? Because it always happens in that order, period. End of discussion. When you try to make it happen in a separate order or you're thinking about it ahead of time, that's when weird things happen. That's when we don't express ourselves completely. So in summary, for that piece, how do I get any athlete and what is important is this framework for me. Everything about that framework is going to guide everything we do underneath it. Okay, what is physics? What do Newton's laws say about what we're doing? Force equals mass times acceleration. What that means is that how much they weigh and how fast they accelerate is important if you're trying to produce force. Okay, these plates measure force. So let's figure out in their intent, what do you think you're accelerating? Where is your weight moving? The biggest mistake people make when they're using physics and they use force is mass times acceleration. Mass moves, that word moves but, whatever, anything, or vice versa. I don't use that phrase a lot. But anyways, there is skill that's applicable to there, because if I can improve the quality of my mass, meaning I can have more lean mass, 2 studies that they've done recently show that increased body fat percentage during a season also changes their joint kinematics, which means the angle that their joints move. Additionally, there is an associative change in injury risk the more someone goes from a certain lean mass model and has more fat mass on them. That's just simple science. So it's not necessarily, we're not looking at, okay, what does a kid weigh or this and that? There's all different shapes and sizes, but it gives us insight into understanding when we see fluctuations and changes. Think about puberty, think about other big changes like that. Freshman year, we may be a little sad, this and that. We eat more. All of a sudden, we're not throwing as hard. We don't have as much command. Well, you know what? That added fat mass likely changed our joint angles and joint kinematics in that sense. So it gives us an understanding of where we can start to help the athlete and look at them on the college side in those spaces. And then for your athletes as they go through puberty and navigate their life as well, we always want to meet them where they're at in that space. The acceleration piece of it is also important because yes, it's a trainable aspect, but we're going to understand, and I know that young kids, you can read any research on performance, are going to be better accelerators early because they lack strength. There's also research papers already done specifically on softball athletes that prove this fact that as athletes get older, high school, college, and they have more strength, they're going to rely more on strength to be able to move off the rubber than they are on acceleration. So a lot of times when you see athletes at a young age and they're throwing their head forward or they're swinging their body, a lot of it's due to a lack of strength. That's why for me, it's always such a priority to look at them through that lens of just drop, shift, drive, landing, delivery, because I just want them to know where their weight is. What does the instruments tell us where their weight is? What are their thoughts? Why do they matter? And where do they place their weight when we test them? Because it's more important, especially at a young age, to know where your weight is than to have flawless mechanics. The ball is 6 ounces. I've never seen a pitcher not let it go. Where it goes and how hard it goes is the most important thing that we're looking at. And that is not dictated by anything else but these laws. Newton's third law, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. That comes down to the position of your body, back to those hip archetypes. Okay, very simple. If my quad and my anterior tibialis contract the most, that means my knee is going to stay extended. Whether I like it or not, the joint action is knee extension. So if a kid is doing that and they're really actively trying to push with their back foot, and also you're telling them, well, I need you to get to your hips more, I need you to throw your hips out, their only solution is going to be swinging their hips. Why? Because the position of the skeleton and the joint action with the muscles that are most active only creates the ability to swing the hips, not actually to do anything else with them. That's why these three things flow together, and that's why they're important. Within those three things, we do testing in terms of their weight, their size, back to this little ecosystem piece. We see that I test this signature, jump testing, height and weight. The height and weight is important when it comes to growth spurts. I'll give an example of that. But here's kind of an application of how this works in that sense. I'm going to zoom in here. So this specific athlete is a freshman, comes in during the summer, and then this is the same year, so started seeing the summer of 24. So we do our testing. I don't necessarily always do testing right away unless someone books a specific evaluation and wants that. And there's a reason for that. I'm not in the business or in the habit of you're coming once to try to achieve something. If you're going to be in lessons with me, if you're going to be doing those things, number one, I have a specific experience level and resume that 98% of the pitching world does not have. I've been paid to be a contractor for NBA athletes, NFL athletes, and people that play on Team Argentina in the World Cup. I have references that can attest to that. I've been around people worth hundreds of millions of dollars. That's their only livelihood. And in the NFL especially, they've got to be off the injury report Tuesday to be able to play. Fly in Monday night, you sign an NDA, they play Sunday. That's how it works. I've been training in performance in that space a lot longer than I've been doing the pitching piece. That's how I got into the pitching piece, because a specific athlete needed something like that. So I did what is my character trait. I learned everything about that space and asked questions so that I could be able to help the athlete. And that's how we're here now. So in that space, people ask me, well, what do you do exactly? If it ain't surgery, I'm probably doing it, period. Like that's the level of skill that I'm fortunate to be able to have now. And thankfully, all I think about because of, and I'll be very short with this, my faith is what I do. I am to steward the gifts and talents that God has given me, and this is part of that space. There is no space for me to be bad at this because it's a talent and treasure that I've been given, and I'm going to steward that gift as well as I can at all times. And that comes to being concerned about your kids, your pitchers, everything. So everything I do in terms of the testing is about amplifying my ability to coach and ability to teach your athlete. So when we look at this athlete here, she comes in, she weighs 140 pounds. Velo's 56.45 pitch average. Her vertical jump peak, 297 pounds of force. This 212%, generally we want to see a kid of about 225 and above, just minimally, to know that they're going to be able to handle stresses of adding more acceleration to their drive, more pop to it, so to say. So very typical. Most of you are going to experience this with your freshman athlete. If you've been playing travel ball, they've been pitching in travel ball. They're going to pitch the majority of the inning. They're going to have a dead arm by the end of it. They're not going to lift quality in season. They may not even lift at all. All they're going to do is ice. And none of it's going to be even close to remotely good enough. And generally their freshman summer is probably some of the worst throwing of their lives, or they're just barely hanging on. They're just gutting it out. So end of freshman year, pretty much, lost 5 pounds. Velo's down. And not only has she lost weight, it'd be something if, okay, maybe everything was great freshman year. They've got a good strength and conditioning program, and that's 135 lean and mean. But her ability to produce force also went down. So if that goes down as well, then now it's going to be tough. And it makes sense as to why she decreased in velo.
Okay,
so when we talk about this, hold on 1 second. Let's be sure we are muted, everybody. Okay, so we talk about this, and okay, we need to gain weight back. We need to do specific things. But in the interim of that, I know because I have experience that this is the majority of what happens with our kids. I see someone an hour a week or 30 minutes a week or bi-weekly. I know there's only so much I can do on my end. So the priority, especially during high school season, especially that time for those people, is to figure out this piece for them and where we can start to change things. Because if we move there, we see now that she was kind of a hip archetype 2. So during that hip archetype 2, here was her force signature. There's the drop. We can see she's an in-betweener. And you can kind of tell with there, her head's forward, so most of the weight's going to be middle, but she moves super quickly onto that front foot, which means there's not necessarily a lot of time loading into that right leg. So we're not going to see really a subsequent drive. So in that December moment, we talked about those things and said, hey, what we're going to work on is your shift. Hip archetype 2s or kids that drop and their weight is more middle of their body, we're going to focus on the shift aspect a little more than anything else, because that's generally where our highest return on investment is going to be. We start to see, even though she's lost weight and she does those things, we're creating a different signature. We're starting to understand some pieces and move a little differently in that aspect. So even though those things have happened, there are gains we've made in her signature. And if I go back one piece, the notes I have from that testing is that the shift is added, there's a good signature. It lacks pop. So this is where we start to, again, from a development standpoint, how are we meeting everyone where they're at in that space and the things we can do. Just to be upfront, this lady is an in-person client, so that's why she has a lot more readings on that case. So we're able to contribute and know where to move next. Okay. And I tell my kids this all the time. I'm going to be as specific as possible with you, because let's just think of it this way. If 98% of the pitch is the same, but there's just more overall energy, you should have an expectation that you should throw harder. So right at the bottom, we go to what she looks like 1 year later. This is just zoomed in a little more, similar signature. Now look at the space between the ship. The blue line to the red line, look at the gap we have now. That gap means there's more weight in the back leg, and we're having a conscious effort of moving all that weight into the front leg to use it. If that's continuing to happen or continually getting better, which it did from the last time we tested, and now we're 11 pounds heavier, and we're also producing more force, we're over that 225 mark. We've gone from 212 to 226. I am perfectly okay with you having an expectation that you should throw harder, because you should, otherwise I'm a liar. We are throwing harder. Now she gets 63, she's touched 65 in games, 66, all those things. But there's an expectation. And so we had the same conversation recently about sophomore year. Hey, let's look back and what happened. That can happen again if you don't do the outside work necessary. And there's no one to be responsible for it, because you're not going to be able to go to a camp and be like, wait. I can hit 66. You just got to come back. Well, when do we come back, kid? I don't actually know when I'm going to do it, because there's these other things. I know it's happened. We know why things are likely happening so that we can meet the athlete and the pitcher where they're at and have a continued plan of growth and development for that space. So again, that's hip archetype 2. Hip archetype 1s are generally going to be front loaders. Okay, right here, she's a front loader. Most of the weight goes front. Again, so we're kind of going to work the shift more. That's going to be our highest ROI, kind of return on investment in that space. So when we look at those things there, that's where primarily most of our work happens. And to give you guys an understanding of these hip archetype 1s, we're going to see the initial eval. Let's make it a little bigger, because here's something parents get lost on and a lot of coaches get lost on. What are the qualities of an athlete's genetic gifts, their athletic awareness, stuff like that? This kid is a prime pitching athlete. Jumps 22 plus inches on the vertical, hits 19 miles an hour. To give you some insight into that, I've gone to several universities, measured all the outfielders. It is very rare that an outfielder is above 18.5. She's a pitcher and can hit 19.12. She's an uber athlete, and she's 6'3". So when we watch the initial eval, a lot of stuff goes on. But what's going to happen with the majority of kids who aren't athletic, and for me, athleticism comes with those numbers, but also an awareness of where your body is that shift piece. If you can view your athlete, they put their heel down and that's how they move, and 100% of the time, they are going to get back over their right foot. And this is what I tell my kids. You have to accomplish both tasks, because I've been with world beaters and I've been with kids with no talent and no genetic advantages. You need to understand which one you are, because right now, especially in pitching, you don't have to be a genetic specimen to pitch the ball hard and to pitch the ball well. We are way far away from only the elite of the elite athleticism wise, can pitch. There's an opportunity for everyone. And I strongly believe that. And I will, for right now, I will die on that hill that I don't care how athletic you are. You may not be able to roll out of bed without falling. If we do the right things for you, there is no reason why you aren't going to be as good as anyone else. Period. If your athlete does not shift head over foot, back on that leg, there is no big drop of the hips, there's no sideways swing, there's no different angles, and we'll see one in a second. That may not be the best opportunity. I don't care what your kid thinks. I always tell my kids, you have to prove it to me in 3 ways. If you want to change something or if you want to do something, you have to be able to tell me what it does. You have to show me why it feels better, video-wise. You have to show me that you hit positions that you want. The radar has to show it. Your spin has to show it. Like, if you can't give me all of those checks, then you're not allowed to be creative. There is no other sport and position where we allow creativity before skill is actually founded and developed, except pitching. And part of it is because there's so much access. And again, the ball's only 6 to 7 ounces. If it were 5 pounds, you would do things a lot better because your body would tell you, hey, we can't move like this with this weight. It's going to hurt us. 6 ounces, you can do whatever you want, and you'll learn to be able to throw it because you are overwhelmingly stronger than the object you're trying to deliver or throw. So in those hip archetype ones, see the signature, we know she's an uber athlete. Her signature, we're like, hey, why aren't you getting all this weight into your front foot? So that's primarily what we focus on. And so we want to be sure that, hey, are we maximizing? Because now the force equals mass equation becomes the skill, a technical skill. Are you moving as much mass and accelerating as much as possible? Or are you just athletically gifted, don't know that you shift really well, so you don't take advantage of it? There are two pieces to that. There are being in a position and there are using the position. And that's something that I always tell my athletes that's important. All right, you look pretty, but there's nothing to it. Let's work on the next part for us. And so hip archetype 1, we work mostly on the shift. We'll play both. I think this one will be slow. Nah, it'll be regular speed. So very different looking rhythm. There's an acceleration piece that gets added to it. But again, especially for her in that space, she's a committed athlete. She's a really quality pitcher. Our ROI is best when you get to college on figuring out your body and making gains in understanding and being more aware of your gifts and doubling down on those gifts first, then trying to add different things. So there's always going to be this play for me, especially with our older athletes, of what is highest ROI for us? And then the collaboration of Newton's laws. How do you interpret this kid? Because I only met her when she had already had 18 years of pitching experience. I did not influence any of that. So I needed to know what words mattered to her, what she thought about certain things. That was important. And then doing all the testing helps us redefine, well, not redefine, but target and be not just accurate, but accurate and precise with where we work in that space there. So that's a kind of a hip archetype 1. These are all in person. In the Zoom space, we do the same thing. Generally, with the first lesson, I'm going to talk about the drop, the shift, and the drive in the same way I discussed with you guys. And we're just going to watch them pitch. I'm going to ask what's important, what's the priority to them, and we're going to submit some video. So here's an example of a Zoom session. It's going to be more hip archetype 2. And again, hip archetype 2s are generally going to be a lot of middle weight, and then front loaded, again, the shift is generally going to be highest ROI. The difference between her and, say, hip archetype 1 is that in this specific case, when I ask this kid what's important to them, the first one, our hip archetype 1, she doesn't really care about the back foot. She's just trying to get her weight on her front foot. She's successful at doing that. We can maximize that component. We can make it better from a training aspect. Her, she actively pushes with her back foot. So that's important for me in understanding her hip archetype, because the hip archetype's also going to tell us how effectively she does it, and if she's in a position where when she's performing the effort, there's actually weight there. So what I mean by that is there's a lot of kids, she pushes now, where's all her weight? Nowhere near that ankle and that hip. It's already too far forward to where only the joint of the ankle is going to create any relative force. So that's going to be very little force. It's not going to be enough force to provide direction. So from a side view, that may look decent, but this is why we do a lot of things from behind. And in some cases, you'll get a little revelation in the side view, because you'll see kids that very far to the left and huge, huge hop to the right. So when we look at the back view, and this is why, again, like, you need to be looking behind and rear, especially in those hip archetype 1s and 2s, even 3s, all of it. Because most, like I said, 90% of social media is about getting weight into that front leg, getting knee over toe, which I will tell all of you is one of the silliest cues ever. Because just getting your knee over your toe or raising your heel does not mean you load that leg. It just means you picture, you look good in a picture. It doesn't mean you load weight. And you still go back to the kids that are athletically aware and you give that information to, they're going to be good at it. And then some of you have daughters who, well, her knee's over her toe. Why isn't it faster? Why isn't it harder? Why is blah, blah, blah? Because that's not what that means. And to be honest, a lot of that cue came from Zoom sessions that other coaches had with me, and that is the only relevant information that they may have taken from that piece. That activating the hamstrings, this and that, blah, blah, blah. It does not matter. What we have to understand is everything is about where our weight is, and that's all we're talking about in these spaces here. So that was one thing she told me. I'm trying to get my knee over my toe. Congratulations, kid, you do. But you know what? There's no weight there. If we look at this difference from our hip archetype 1, that the majority of hip archetype 1s will kind of have this piece, her weight is falling off, her heel is turning in, and she is drifting. So the shift is bad. A lot of people would look at, if we just stopped it here, oh, that looks like a decent front side stability. You look at the rear view, it's not. And it completely changes the orientation of what she can do with the ball. Because now, just think of it like a lot of you are like, okay, well, we work on arm width and her arm is straight all the time, like it's locked out. If your kid shifts and they drift, their chest is going to have a stretch with the shoulder. So the best solution to deliver the ball is likely going to be in creating speed, especially if their coach tells them they need arm speed. This is the best solution. This isn't bad mechanics. She is literally doing the best thing available because of where her weight is at the time she's trying to do it. That's just how it is. And because of that, we only have access to certain pitches because of where our hand position is. So see all this, we talk, hey, let's try this shift thing. And I just want you to kind of work through that. We have drills that we do for the shift, and words kind of a full pitch now. You can see the mat kind of slide forward now. There's no hop, and we never at any point worked on not hopping. There was no need for it, no use for it. I have never, ever in my life put a box, told someone to put a slider here. None of those things are relevant in terms of why they're happening. You're going to get the same 20% of kids that it works really well when they use the tool, and then they don't do it when they pitch, because it's just a cue for that moment. The issue is where their weight is, period. And that's what becomes important. Now she's not drifting, and that's the start of something. Once we can have a consistent landing, then we can talk about stuff at delivery. Once we know what a shift is, then we can talk about applying more energy into it. And now if you notice, her foot is actually flatter at that same moment. And she's actually more narrow. And some people be like, well, her head is down more. I don't care. I care about the angle of her hips and her intent. If her intent is greater than the weight of her head, again, we talked about Newton's laws, your thoughts are important. If my intent is now in a different space, that is going to be a greater external force than having no intent here and having the head in what would look like a different position. Because yeah, I did used to say, if your spine and shin angle match, that's all you need. And that's where that came from. That's not the entirety of the point. Your spine and shin angle have to match when you're getting into your shift. Now they match when she's in her shift. Now they're different. She's continuing to ride. And so again, that's those principles. Oh, I don't know why I stopped sharing. Help us target. I'm going to give you one more example of an in-person. So now with the pitch logic gives you ball path and it targets, you get to see certain things. So if we look at hip archetypes, when we get to hip archetype 3, generally the most bang for our buck is going to be the drop part and adding relevance, not just positionally to it, but also energy. So when we get to this position, what I want you to understand is in this position, the glute, the hamstring, and the calf are contracting at the same time. This blue line is your Achilles. If your calf is contracting, then your Achilles tendon stretches. Do you have any insight into strength training? Just real short, the Achilles tendon is responsible for our explosiveness because of the stretch shortening cycle. If it's not stretched, then we're not going to have we're not going to have as much explosiveness as we can have. After this, just FYI, is when we'll be able to ask questions. So what we want to understand about acceleration too is most science and most research tells us that in acceleration, hip torque is a great indicator in the amount of hip torque in increasing acceleration. So one of the mistakes we'll make is some people do stand in this way, but they still end up pushing through their foot like hip archetype 2. I sit my kids in this way because I want them to understand the relevance of being able to drive the thigh and swing it back into the ankle. The ankle and foot are stiff so that they can handle the energy that the upper and lower leg and the glute take into it. And so what we understand from that piece, I'll give you library, import. So horizontal, vertical, very different, but this is the teaching point. In order to create hip torque, the knee and the ankle are going to be relatively fixed so that extension, the hamstring is going to contract hard first, and then the hips get into a position, the pelvis gets into a position of extension to then contract. So when we stand in hip archetype 3, if I were to push just through my ankle, this exercise that we use is a great example, and I use it to show my kids, like, Okay, just pump your heel. Is that ever going to extend your hips? Why do you think it's going to do that in your pitch? It's not. This position gives us relevance and more information because now we get to really figure out that my thigh is pulling into the ankle and foot, and the ankle and knee stay relatively fixed so that the thigh, you can see my hamstring start to work more. It's a little relaxed right here. You can see the tension, and you'll see the tension build into it right there. You see it's almost like my hamstring disappears in my shorts because it's contracting. And then the glutes aren't in position to create extension until you can see, like, even there, my hips are still pretty round and flaccid. We don't see any tension till right there. When I'm in a position, and again, these two joints stayed fixed the whole time. That is how you supply energy through the ankle and foot complex so that you can get to access of the hips. I've never once taught a kid or told a kid to, I need hip extension, thrust your hips. That does not access the glutes ever. That's not what we do. And most of the things, that's just anatomy. In this space, you'll notice to get to full hip extension, I don't bring my thigh to my chest. When you bring your thigh to your chest, all you do is bring back flexion and you get away from extension and teaching. Hamstring on, hips on, knee, calf, flexed. This is one of the hardest things, and I will be upfront about that. It is one of the hardest things for kids to learn the action of the thigh swinging back into the ankle instead of pushing through the foot. It is difficult, but the reason I do that so early is because I want them to experience difficulty, because when they get strong and they get into strength training, these are going to be more of the positions and elements where they're building strength. Glutes, hamstrings, posterior chain, RDLs, bridges, squats, all these different things come from hip flexion to hip extension, knee flexion to knee extension, fixed knees and ankles. All these things are going to be, and I just tell them, I was like, look, it's hard now because you're weak, and it is a skill right now more than it is something you naturally do. Correct. But it's going to make it very simple to start to add velocity when you hit a position, because that drop, if we think of it just like that, you're literally just dropping and swinging that thigh as hard as you can with that fixed knee and ankle into your foot. And the reciprocation of energy, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. I've never told a kid, get off the rubber. It is not your responsibility to get off the rubber. It is your responsibility to create the action that the ground reacts in a way that it throws you off of it. If we're not doing that, we're going to figure out why, and we're going to figure out how we do that better by using this framework. So in that case, for her specifically, this was her initially. This was last summer. Big reach, swings, kind of just in the air a lot. And this is appropriate because this is a shorter athlete. Okay. We have a shorter athlete. Some of you have shorter athletes. And from, you can be short and you can still have long arms. She doesn't have any of those things. So when we look at like the genetic aspect of it, meeting the athlete where they're at is also about being more specific about the positions they're in, because we want to give them the best opportunity to achieve success. And so for her, she's pitching in a way that's not going to account for those things. So that's not hip archetype 3. So I switched her. And then it's taken about her, she went through that freshman cycle. So the sophomore year, this last spring, was about keeping her healthy. Had the healthiest year she had, pitched the same amount of innings, like almost getting close to 300 innings in high school, and then felt really good during the summer. That's what we want. Okay, now those things are happening. Now, one of the things we did is, okay, I know what your drop looks like. So when we have a drop, we just talked about it, we see energy bang back into the ankle. One of the things I like about the pitch logic and the ball path is you can see here, everything just moves forward. There's not necessarily a drop. So I asked her to trust me. We're going to do certain things. Trust me. We're going to work on that drop. We can get into the position. You can see her in the position. It just doesn't have anything to it, much like the other kid where we said it lacks pop. I know she doesn't lack strength. It was just about being able to do it. And you can see here, she's in hip archetype 3. But by the time, again, it doesn't change. When you push is important because that's where your mass is. That's what we have to understand about force and the skill aspect. It's where your mass is when you push, not just how much you weigh. So she pushes too late. So you could have a great shift. There's no energy to it. So that's 819. That was her fastest pitch that day. Another thing to it, like you can even see just standing and falling into the drop, she's dropping forward. So now when we move forward, you can clearly see we're starting to get drop, then you move, there's your shift. And that's for me specifically why we do certain things. I'm going to know from every instrument that I have what you're doing, and we're going to know what's valuable for you. I'm going to hold myself accountable for being that specific and that good to you because I believe you deserve it if you're in here dying all the time. And for most of you, you're dying all the time in anything. The reason I love these kids so much is because they are given the least amount of resources, and you have the job of a professional athlete from 8 years old all the way till after college, and no one considers that for you. It's just expected. So again, we look at the date, that's 2 months later. Now we're touching 60 and pretty much purring at 59. But again, there's the drop. And here's the thing, I know the drop can still be better for her. In the video, because it happens fast, you're going to see kind of the push of the drop. But again, you see that she pushes much earlier now. We can get even better than that because it still is a little too low. She's already at a point we could have a better hinge. She probably should be 63, 63 and a half pretty easily without adding any extra weight, adding any extra acceleration. So we're going to continue to work on the skill of the drop till we hit that number. And then we're going to start to work even more on the shift. And so the way you'll want you to understand that is kids who we work on the shift more right off the bat, we're going to go ahead and maximize that, see what number that gets us to. I'm going to have a pretty good idea of where that number is going to get us to just from experience. And then we're going to add a little bit of drop to it again, the shift can be great, but if there's nothing, the way you add from behind it is, let's start to use that back leg a little more. And that comes down to, like I said, the consistent piece. I'm going to care about, do you know where your weight is first? These are 3 different kids. Those are 5 pitches in a row, 4 pitches in a row. They have no idea where they are. All these kids got better, and what do you see? Repeatable actions follow all laws and principles. Wolff's law, Davis' law, and the principle of specificity. Your bones, your tissues, your tendons, your muscles all model themselves along lines of stress. If the stress is too variable, meaning it's too different all the time, why do you have an expectation to have more of something? You don't have that expectation anywhere else in life. Everything I do is about helping understand that, helping meet that, and helping create these repeatable actions so that your pitch is an expression of you as a body moving through space.